"You're fired, Eleanor." 6 months later, I owned the room. The memory of that day still burned like acid in my mind. The sleek glass office in downtown Seattle, the rain tapping softly against the windows, the way my mother didn't even glance up from her pristine desk as she slid the termination letter across the table. "You're done here, Eleanor," she said flatly. "We can't risk the company's reputation just because you have something to prove." I was 29 years old, the youngest R&D director in Everlyn Therapeutics history, and apparently too much of a threat to the family image. 6 months later, I stood in my Manhattan penthouse, adjusting the collar of my navy blue Stella McCartney blazer. Tonight was the annual Global Pharma Leadership Gala at the Ritz-Carlton. And I had a surprise. My phone vibrated. A message from my chief of staff. "Release goes live at 9 p.m. sharp, Ms. Ward." I smiled, remembering exactly when everything changed. After that humiliating dismissal, I did something my mother never expected. I called Dr. Marcus Chen, the CEO of Ascendrix Labs, Everlyn's most feared competitor. "Your Alzheimer's drug isn't passing phase 3 because your delivery model's off," I told him. "I know what you're missing." He was skeptical, but 3 weeks later, when I walked him through the neural binding process Everlyn had failed to patent, he wasn't skeptical anymore. He was offering me equity and full control of his innovation team. What my mother never understood was that I hadn't spent 7 years at Everlyn just taking orders. I was studying, tracking every move. I knew where the skeletons were buried, and I knew how to outpace them. After setting up my tent, it's getting late, and suddenly, the black car rolled to a stop outside the Ritz. Paparazzi clustered near the entrance, their flashes illuminating the crisp evening air. They weren't here for me. Not yet. They were chasing the industry dinosaurs, the ones who didn't know the game had changed. "Miss Ward," a young staffer greeted me, clipboard in hand. "Dr. Chen would like you to join him on stage, at the presentation." Inside the gold-trimmed ballroom, I scanned the crowd, and there she was. Miranda Ward in her signature crimson dress, laughing with shareholders near the champagne tower. My older sister Celeste flanked her like always. They looked triumphant, likely celebrating their recent acquisition of a failing biotech startup out of Chicago. The same one I let slip through, knowing its IP was tied up in legal quicksand. "Eleanor," a hesitant voice broke my focus. I turned. It was Lila, my former assistant at Everland. Her eyes widened the moment she took me in, poised, powerful. "I didn't know you'd be here," she stammered. "Your mother told everyone you left to focus on your health, said the pressure got to you." I gave a calm smile. "Funny," I said, "because tonight the pressure's on them." At 9:01 p.m. the ballroom screens lit up. Ascendrix Labs and Eleanor Ward unveil breakthrough Alzheimer's treatment. FDA fast track approved. Across the room, my mother dropped her champagne, and I just kept smiling. As she now, I checked my watch, 8:55 p.m. "Well, Lila," I said with a smile, "in about 5 minutes, your former boss is going to have a very different story to tell." I began moving through the crowd, gracefully accepting a flute of champagne from a passing waiter but never lifting it to my lips. I needed a clear mind for what was coming next. Across the ballroom, I spotted Marcus Chen. He gave me a barely perceptible nod. The man was a visionary, and more importantly, a strategist. He'd known when to let go. Unlike my mother, he saw that progress required evolution, not ego. 8:59 p.m. A burst of laughter drew my gaze to the center of the room. There she was, Miranda Ward, regal and smug, holding court with a cluster of shareholders. My sister Celeste stood by her side, eyes scanning the room as if it still belonged to them. "As the market consolidates, Everlyn will lead the merger," Miranda boomed confidently. "We've been shaping this industry for 2 decades. Not for much longer." I slipped my phone from my pocket, watching the countdown tick across the lock screen. In my periphery, I noticed the press crew begin checking their phones, frowning, blinking, straightening up. 9:00 p.m. A ding rippled across the ballroom like a tremor. The headline lit up 100 screens at once. Ascendrix Labs appoints Eleanor Ward as new CEO in $12.00. B industry merger. Gasps broke out. Conversations halted mid-sentence. Cameras raised. All eyes swung toward the woman in navy blue. Me. Miranda's glass shattered as it hit the floor. Celeste clutched her phone, blinking furiously. I walked into the center of the room, heels echoing off marble tile. Calm, controlled. "Good evening," I said, my voice slicing through the silence. "I believe some introductions are in order." The hush that followed was electric. Miranda looked pale, lips parted in disbelief. Celeste glanced between her screen and me like she was seeing a ghost. "Eleanor," my mother finally managed, her voice hoarse. "What is the meaning of this?" Before I could answer, Marcus Chen stepped forward, placing a steady hand on my shoulder. "Allow me," he said. "As of today, I'm stepping down as CEO of Ascendrix Labs. Effective immediately, Eleanor Ward will take full operational control. She is now CEO." Shocked, whispers, dozens of phones lifted into the air. I could see the headlines forming. Fired daughter returns to lead billion-dollar rival. Family feud goes corporate. Pharma queen in the making. "This isn't possible," Celeste stammered. "She left. She walked away." "Can't possibly what, Celeste?" I turned to face her. "Can't possibly understand the science, can't possibly lead a company?" I pulled out my tablet and tapped it awake. "Maybe we should review Everlynn's abandoned R37 trials? Or would you prefer I explain how we just secured exclusive rights to the corrected delivery model?" Celeste went white. Miranda didn't speak, couldn't. And me? I just smiled, because I had arrived. If you felt that shift in power, just wait until you see what happens next. Tap subscribe so you don't miss the moment Eleanor turns the industry upside down. The R37 project had been Everlyn Therapeutics' secret weapon, a groundbreaking arthritis therapy they'd sunk millions into. But I knew what they didn't want anyone else to know. "How do you know about," Celeste began, "about how the latest trials triggered liver toxicity in over 30% of patients?" I finished for her. "Or how they buried the results, hoping the FDA wouldn't dig too deep?" Miranda Ward stepped forward, her face tight, her voice even tighter. "Eleanor, I don't know what you think you're doing." "This isn't theater," Marcus Chen interjected calmly. "In 6 months, your daughter has transformed Ascendrix Labs. The Alzheimer's treatment we stalled on for over a year, she cracked the delivery pathway in 2 weeks." Gasps spread across the ballroom. The industry had been buzzing about that stalled breakthrough for months, but no one knew why it had suddenly resumed, or who was behind it. "And more importantly," I added, "we've just finalized our acquisition of Nexora Therapeutics." Dead silence. Nexa was the third largest pharma company in North America. Everlyn had chased that deal for years, always falling just short. "That's not possible," Miranda said sharply. "We've been in talks with Nexora for months." "Were you?" I smiled and tapped my tablet. "Strange, because they signed with us last Tuesday. Would you like to see the agreement?" Celeste looked panicked. Miranda didn't blink, but her jaw tightened as Thomas, one of Everlyn's corporate counsel, leaned toward her and whispered urgently. "Dad," Celeste hissed, tugging Miranda's sleeve, "if this is true, it means they now control 35% of the market," I said, completing the sentence, "making Ascendrix the largest pharmaceutical company in the country." A beat passed. "Or should I say, making us your biggest competitor." That's when the reporters broke rank. Their polite distance vanished. Questions exploded toward us like shrapnel. "Ms. Ward, did you orchestrate this merger from the beginning?" "Dr. Chen, why appoint Eleanor Ward as CEO? What happens to Everlyn now that Ascendrix leads the market?" I raised a hand and the noise cut like a switch. "All excellent questions," I said calmly, "but I believe my mother was just explaining her plans to lead a global merger." I turned toward her fully. "Would you like to revise that statement, Miranda?" Her skin was flushed now, not pale but red with fury. The vein in her temple throbbed, just like the day she handed me my termination letter. "You think this makes you powerful?" she spat under her breath. You think you can just walk in here and— Actually, Mom, I said smoothly, I just did. The ballroom seemed to hold its breath as I reached into my clutch and pulled out a slim USB drive. Silver scuffed at the corners, very familiar. Her eyes locked onto it. You remember this, don't you? I asked, holding it between two fingers. The drive you accused me of using to steal Everlynn's research data. You were half right. I looked out at the crowd, journalists, investors, rivals, and smiled as the flashbulbs resumed their frenzy. I wasn't stealing secrets, I said evenly, lifting the USB for the crowd to see. I was collecting evidence. Marcus Chen stepped forward again, his voice calm but commanding. Ladies and gentlemen, may I have your attention? There's more to tonight's announcement. Cameras flashed as reporters leaned forward, hanging on his every word. Ascendrix Labs is not only acquiring Nexora Therapeutics, Marcus continued. We're launching a new division, one committed to ethical pharmaceutical development and pricing. Miranda's face faltered for the first time. Her carefully guarded composure cracked. You wouldn't dare, she muttered, voice sharp. I turned toward the room. It's called the Grace Initiative, I announced clearly, eyes locked on her. Named after my mother, Grace Ward, who died because she couldn't afford a cancer medication that Everlyn Therapeutics marked up by over 3,000%. Silence. Heavy. Chilling. Even the reporters stopped scribbling, sensing the gravity of the truth. She needed 6 doses, I continued. Each cost under $5, 0 cents to produce. But Everlyn sold them at $9,000, 0 cents a piece. The drug was right there, and she died anyway. Celeste paled, Miranda stiffened. I inhaled sharply, but kept my voice level. She didn't die because the science failed. She died because the system chose profit over people. And now, we're going to change that. Thomas stepped forward, hands raised as if that would somehow stop momentum. Eleanor, you can't just— Can't just what? I snapped. Tell the truth? I turned back to the crowd. The Grace Initiative will start by making life-saving cancer treatments available at cost. Then we move on to diabetes, HIV, ALS. We're not just disrupting the industry, we're reforming it. The room burst into noise, flashes, questions, shouting, but I kept my gaze fixed on Miranda. Her world was collapsing, publicly, irrevocably. You'll destroy everything, she hissed. This industry won't survive your idealism. No, I said quietly. I'm not destroying it. I'm fixing it. I nodded to Marcus. He pressed a button on his phone. Around the ballroom, every screen lit up, bright, damning. Internal Everlyn files flickered to life. Confidential pricing strategies. Trial results, suppressed after safety concerns. Emails discussing how to minimize public concern over side effects. I faced the stunned audience. Everything you see here, I said, has already been submitted to the FDA and International Council for Integrity in Medicine. Every falsified report, every inflated price tag, every ignored warning. Miranda lunged forward, but before she could reach me, 2 guards stepped in, my guards. You ungrateful little— Careful, Mom, I cut her off. The cameras are still rolling, and your shareholders are watching. Almost on cue, her phone buzzed. So did mine, and Celeste's, and Tomas's. A ripple of panicked notifications surged across the room as the news hit the wires. Stock tickers shifted, statements were demanded. A reporter stepped forward. Ms. Ward, what do you say to those who claim this is all just personal revenge? I adjusted the collar of my blazer, standing tall beneath the ballroom lights. This isn't about revenge, I said, steady and clear. It's about responsibility. About doing what's right, I continued, something I learned, not from Miranda Ward, but from Grace. I turned toward my mother. She looked older than I remembered. Not powerful, not invincible, just hollow. You were right about one thing, Mom, I said, my voice steady. I wasn't good enough to run Everlyn Therapeutics. A pause. I was better. The room erupted. Not with applause, not yet, but with ringing phones, gasps, and chaos. Notifications lit up screens. Investors scrambled to grasp what had just happened. Everlynn's stock was tanking, Ascendrix was soaring, and somewhere, I knew my mother was finally at peace. I turned back to the room. "Now, if you'll excuse me," I said with quiet command, "I have a company to run, and lives to save." As I walked toward the ballroom doors, flanked by Marcus and my executive team, I heard him behind me addressing the media. "The Grace Initiative officially launches next month," Marcus declared, "and we fully expect it to reshape the pharmaceutical industry as we know it." I paused at the threshold, turning to take one last look. Miranda stood alone now, abandoned by the shareholders she once courted, her influence unraveling before her eyes. Celeste was frantically texting. Tomas was pacing, phone pressed to his ear, no doubt trying to reach their legal team. I wasn't afraid. They were fighting for power. I was fighting for purpose. My phone buzzed, a message from my assistant. "Your mother's foundation is approved. Everything's ready to launch alongside Grace Initiative." I smiled, stepping into the crisp night air of Manhattan. Sometimes, the best revenge isn't dismantling your enemies. It's becoming everything they said you couldn't be, and using that power to lift others. My car pulled up, sleek and quiet. As I opened the door, I heard one last question called from the crowd behind me. "Miss Ward, what message would you give to young women in the industry?" I turned, catching the reporter's gaze. The lights of the city glinted off the camera lenses as they waited, silent and still. I let the moment stretch before I answered. "Never let anyone tell you you're not good enough, and when they try to stop you, don't get even, get better." The door closed behind me with a satisfying click, sealing the noise away. Tomorrow, the real work would begin. But tonight, I had proved what I always believed deep down. Sometimes, getting banned from the family business isn't a setback. It's a push. A push to build something greater. Something better. If my story meant something to you, if watching me rise from being dismissed and underestimated to leading the largest pharmaceutical company in the country stirred something inside you, I'd love to hear from you. Drop a comment below. Tell me when you've been told you weren't enough. Share the moment you chose integrity over convenience, growth over revenge. Your words matter. They remind others that they're not alone, and that standing tall doesn't require a stage, just courage. Subscribe if you believe in building something better, not just for applause, but for impact. I didn't step into this role for revenge. I did it because someone had to change the way things are done. Maybe that someone is you in your own industry, your own family, your own quiet corner of the world. And if you keep following this journey, I'll show you what comes next. Not the fairy tale ending, but the hard, necessary work of using power for good. Here's what I want you to take with you. Never let someone else's lack of vision define your path. When doors close, especially the ones you thought were yours by right, it's easy to doubt yourself. Don't. Take that fire, that hurt, and turn it into purpose. Study harder, show up again, build better, use your voice, and when the moment comes, you won't just walk back into the room, they'll turn to see you leading it. So many of us have been told to stay in our lane, but I'm here to say, pave your own. If this story gave you strength, if it reminded you who you are or who you could become, support it, share it, talk about it, and above all, keep showing up for yourself and for the people who need someone like you to change the game. Because the world doesn't change when we get even. It changes when we get better, together.